Hi, my name is Benedict. Today's mix walkthrough video is actually not going to be a mix. Oh, curses. It's actually going to be about mastering. I'm going to show you a mastering project, or some little bits of a mastering project, and how I approach a light master. Bit of background. Luscept, I think that's how it's pronounced. This fellow, again, I'm not quite sure how you pronounce that, Canana. Doesn't really matter. Showed this in a group of game developers. He showed, oh, look, here's my new record. I put it out on Bandcamp. I went over, had a listen. There's a lot that I actually liked about this, but there were some difficulties. Number one being that I actually had to turn my big volume knob up by a quarter of its full rotation. Now that tells me that it's vastly too quiet. If the music can't come out of the speakers to me, it's hard to want to listen to it. It's kind of like trying to have a conversation with somebody who's like 4 kilometers away and speaking in a normal tone or a normal volume. You're going to kind of go, yeah, look, I'm not going to chase you on this one. So being me, I said, hey, look, sorry, but that one's gonna hurt you. And after a bit of back and forth, I said, look, let me master this so that we can bring this up to a nice listenable level, and I knew I'd probably be able to help a little bit with overall tone. This gets me my first official credit on a record. Here we go. Look, mastering done by... He must be a fine fellow. Cool. It's nice to have. I don't pitch myself as a mastering engineer, but it is nice to have one of those. But it also gave me the opportunity to show how I do it. Now, I've made written articles, typing keyboard down here you can't see, about it, and various other videos where I've shown myself doing things, but there's a tremendous steady demand for how do you master stuff. I'm going to show you how I finalize my tracks. This is not a master to go off to vinyl. This is how I make my stuff ready to go on Bandcamp. This is important stuff to know. Now, before we go any further with this, mastering is a complex, we'll call it an art form. Just as writing music is actually a complex art form, mastering is a complex art form as well. It is not as easy as just going, oh, look, I've downloaded a free copy of some DAW and I stole my mate's license for his Waves plugin. I pile it on there, I turn everything up, and I've mastered something. It's not like that. As you'll see, it's quite subtle, and it has to be situational. So again, you'll see, oh, we'll just download that preset and apply that preset, and you'll be banging. If it's good enough for you, but it's not mastering. It's not going in there and actually really saying, what does this track need to work well? Now, I've had some negative feedback from a few certain types of people with my mix walkthroughs where I talk about my job is to sell that song and to provide my take on that song. That's the essence of a creative mix. You know, if I had Billy Idol's guitarist Steve Stevens come in and I've written a piece of music and I say, Steve, now I want you to play what you feel is right for this piece. What's he going to do? He's going to do a Steve Stevens. And so he bloody well should, because I asked Steve Stevens to come in. I didn't ask Eddie Van Halen, for whatever reason. Maybe Eddie is too cool to come to my studio, but Steve is that desperate he will. Doesn't matter what the reasons are. It's not for me to say, play this note and make it ping here and do this and do that. I can give him my vision. Hopefully my vision is not, play it like Panama, man, because that would just be mean, because it's Steve Stevens. Also, if I were to say to him, like, play it like White Wedding, man, it'd be kind of cool, uncool, because guess what? I'm not Billy Idol, which is the great sadness of my life. But my point here is that we need to express who we are as individuals through the work that we do, and as clients, we should want people who work that way, not people who work as cogs in our machine. Because when you hire a specialist, they're special. I would hire Steve Stevens to play guitar for me because he's bloody Steve Stevens. Even if a person isn't a name, you should be hiring them based on their skill set. So do your research. Now, with mastering, it was important, and very much in this situation important, you generally don't want to be altering the person's sound. I mentioned this before, once sent off a track to a compilation thing, a local thing that was happening, and they sent back my mastered thing ready to go on the final tape. I barely recognized it. They'd been so heavy-handed with their, it was called techno at the time, but their EDM thinking, that they'd actually warped the EQ and whatever, and compression and whatever else they'd done. They'd warped it so much that my track had effectively changed genre. And that's kind of not a cool thing to do in mastering. In mastering, your job is not to suddenly take the mix and make it blammin'. There's a lot of that kind of chatter, but it's wrong. Wrong. Get that out of your mind. You don't make a great mix at the mastering stage. You have a good mix, and the mastering will bring it up and make it great to go in the world. But it's making the most of what is there in the mix. Yes, you will find some problems, and I show some problems being fixed here, but the aim is to fix those problems not by turning it into something else, but by saying, okay, well, what was this trying to do and didn't quite get it right that I can fix here? But don't go in with a mindset of, this is broken, I have to fix it, oh, this mix is shit, oh, if I turn everything up to 11 then it can make it cool. That's absolutely the wrong way to approach mastering. You've merely got to prepare it to go in the box in which it gets delivered. You know when you buy a box of tissues, pull out the little thing in the middle and pull up the first one, and then the second one comes up too. Mastering's like that. You're preparing the product to go in the box so it's going to function nicely for the person who hears it. So, enough about that. Let's start. Here's the first piece that I worked on, I believe. Yes, no matter. This is how it sounds. So here, obviously, once the mastering process is in, it gets louder. That's good. But there are other things that it does. It gets brighter. It gets more reaching out to you. And it also gets wider. But you'll note that I haven't used any stereo wideners. And I've been pretty light on with EQ. But we brought everything forward. So again, a little bit of A/B. It is a pretty frantic track, this one. So it's if you find that a little bit challenging, fair enough. Don't worry about that. Simply listen to the audio and the difference. That's what you're looking for here. Just the difference. Not that it has to be radical. Just that it makes it go from being ooh to ooh. Again, haven't changed the sound of this at all. Yes, sonically it's a little different, if we want to be technical, but we're not interested in technical, we're just interested in, have we made this nicer to use? Remember those tissues? It's nice to use because you pull the first one out and the second one's there ready for you. This has made this nicer to use, this mix. The process is quite simple. Now, I've done everything in this one in the masters, so there's no EQing, there's no low pass filtering, high pass filtering, anything like that. I've kept as much of the overall tone of what was there as is possible. So we look now in the inserts. What we've got is a master brush compressor, an equalizer. At the moment, the EQ is just doing a low pass at 30 hertz, simply because anything below, well, often anything below about 60 hertz is just, it's adding a lot of level to your track, but nothing that anyone can hear unless they've got an absolute mofo of a sub. But don't mix music for those guys unless you're writing bass music, and then ignore everything I say. But it's good to take stuff that's inaudible and just going to mess up your mix. It's good to make that disappear. So that's why that's always on. I've added a couple of dB. I've put in a saturation plugin. This handles our overall final levels. You'll see there's a maximizer, there's a limiting device there, but it's off. I'll show you how that works. And then my final limiter. It's loud, but you'll see my levels, my peaks are up or around the 0, but my RMS is around the -12. That's called crest factor. That's something you want to look for. If your RMS is above 12, then you've got a dynamic range that's like this. Not only is it going to be really fatiguing to listen to, regardless of the style of music, it's going to get pinged like a bastard when you go onto SoundCloud or Spotify or whatever. They're going to go, your LUFS are way too high, and turn your whole track down. You don't want that. You really don't want that, because even though the average listening volume will seem the same, your track will have lost impact compared to one that's dynamic. So loudness wars, forget it. It's a nightmare for you to mix that way. Let's go through and actually let's start again. This is going to be the coolest way to do this. Let's start again. I'm going to get rid of all my devices here. Gone, 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 gone. So it's literally the WAV file I've been sent. He's exported out of Fruity Loops, not that it matters where it comes from. That's the WAV file. So let me walk you through. I'm going to master this. Again, will it sound exactly the same? Maybe, maybe not. Not the point. Simply to show you how simple it is to do what you need to do. So we will start with our maximizer. Now you can see it, but I didn't use that in the end. No, I didn't. But I never run music without something to stop ugly stuff coming through. Because if for some reason I end up doing this, not good move, but you see, while it's hitting the meters, pinning the meters, it's not blowing up the world. So I'll have that there. That's my backstop. Nothing gets past this. You shall not pass. So that's there to ensure that whatever I'm doing, if I'm doing some EQ, get excitable, nothing can explode. That's there when I'm writing music, absolutely everything. Now the first thing that I want here is that master bus compressor. The reason these are so valued, I want that first. The SSL style device, which originally appeared in Reason up in the top corner, I found it a pain up there, actually never used it now that it's come into the rack. Now I am not saying buy Reason, I am not saying go out and buy a clone of this device, merely to show you how it works. I've shown using the M class in another video. This shows using this. This is deliberately designed purely for this one function, and it does it pretty darn well. The one thing we need to be aware of is that they kind of cheated when they gave us this device with its default settings. It adds 5 dB straight away. Now, while in many ways that's sensible, because a well-made mix will commonly need around 6 dB between the mix and the finalize or the master stage, They've given us that boost, so it instantly sounds good, but I don't want that boost as I A-B compare. So it's kind of mean, so make sure that if you're using, when you're using any kind of compression device, compressor limiter, whatever, that it's not doing a sneaky. Now, I know that Fruity Loops, it has a sneaky built in that when you first open it, there's a limiter. And it's making everything sound big and grand. Sneaky. Fine if you accept it, but it's changing things. Now, the whole idea here is that we want to change as little as possible whilst getting the best result possible. Okay, so we got our fine fella here. Let's just get this back up so we can see what we're listening to. Oh, before I go further, here's a trick that I learnt from Stav, Mixing With Your Mind. He's a smart fellow and had a real legitimate career in places like Abbey Road and what have you. When he wrote his book, the one and only Sir George Martin wrote a foreword for him. Stav's a cool guy. He knows what he's doing. Now, here's a method which I've shown before, but you can apply it to the master bus compressor as well. What we're looking for at this point is not messing with levels. People come in and they look at the compressor and it's all about levels, man. No, we're very much working with tone over time. And I've written there's a whole video series about tone over time. If you're like, what the fuck's that, Benedict? Go find the video. Tone over time. That's all that mixing is. It's managing tone and levels over time. What a compressor does is very much the essence of tone over time. It looks at our levels and it rides them. Everything it does is after the fact. Always after the fact. And that's fine. So what his method that he encourages, and I learned to compress so much better, basically I could not compress before I learned this method from him, is that we're not looking for levels, we're not trying to control our master levels, that comes later. What we're looking to do is control the groove or the feel of the piece. The most common term for that is glue compressing. So we're going to use this compressor to make this track feel more like it's one. Now, if you get a remastered Best of Chicago and compare it to the original vinyl version of the guys hanging with their painty sticks and what have you, really different feel. Very, very different feel at all. The original Best of Chicago, the mixes feel very sort of, now it's not because they're compressed to buggery or anything, it's just because they're really nicely glued together. It's for AM radio and they sound beautiful. They may not have a frequency range like this, they probably got a frequency range like this, but they sound beautiful as music. The remastered version, yes, it's got a nice big frequency range and there's tons of bombastic compression and what have you, but it doesn't sound as magical. When you listen to Saturday in the Park, it needs to sound magical. And that's what you're looking to do with your track here. You're not looking to say, how do I make the drums sound bigger? You're not looking to make anything sound different. You're merely looking to bring the magic. So let's start with some really, really brutally aggressive settings. All we're looking for is a groove. Smashed. Hear how that's actually emphasized the pulse that he's got in his piece. It's moving with that. You can see it dancing with that. That's the essential groove of this piece. It can get annoying, but that is the essential groove of this piece. We've now found how to match it with our compression settings. Obviously, brutally. We don't want to do that brutally. Our threshold is still too low. Let's take it back out. Okay, perfect. We had the perfect timing there too. Because we've got our steady, this is what our piece goes like, and we see that we stay below 4 dB of gain reduction. So that's showing us that we're not turning anything down by more than 2 to 4 dB. We only want 2 or 3 dB maximum of gain reduction at this point. Remember, we're not trying to control overall levels. Your mix should have that basically right, and we'll handle the rest later. But this will help. Very, very subtle, and I don't fully expect you to hear it through the YouTube video, especially in this content because it's so frantic. But what you're looking for is a sense that just gels together that little bit more. Now we've got quite a short release and a very long attack, so that's allowing most of the excitable stuff through. That's one way of attacking it. That's where the natural groove was. We'll see how we go with that. Ratios you want to keep really low unless you're going to have a super high threshold. If we're up here, then you can use 4 or even 10 as your... And it can be kind of cool, but it can also be a little brutal. Because I want it to be as easy as possible, we can get a more natural compression by going with a low ratio, dropping our threshold a bit, but still just that same amount of crushionation. That's it. That's all our compressor needs to do. It should not be doing any more than that. So now, next thing was the EQ. You can use whatever EQ you like. I actually just really like the EQ, the M class that comes with this. I love the SSL thing when it's in this box. And the maths is probably the same. But when it comes to this, I like to do it with this device. I've experimented with lots of other things. This is the ones that I like. They give me the results that I want. Now straight away, I'm going to cut off those lows like I said. And on the highs, I know that I generally like to, and you've got to find your own place, from about 8K up. I'll give it a couple of dB. And we're deliberately giving it brightness there, because something that will happen as you compress, and the more heavily you compress, your high frequencies will get muted. Not as in turned off muted, but they will become less because they're more delicate, and your low frequencies, which tend to have an impact of driving your compressor, will tend to dominate them, so your mix tilts a little. This EQ will put that back. There's going to be some person who's wanting to frantically type into the comments right now, but that's why you use multiband compression, mate. You're a dick because you don't use multiband compression. Don't do it. I'm going to rip you a new one if you do it. Multiband compression, sure, do it if you want. All the pros I know don't use it. They won't use it because they say it feels very unnatural. I played around with it. It feels really unnatural. To me, it feels like a wonderful way to destroy the original sonic tone of a mix. Entirely up to you what you use. There's no rules, but don't put your rules on me. I'm showing you how to do it over easy, and this is a time-honored way of doing it. And yes, you will find a little bit of emphasis from the bass, but you're not messing anything up. You can always put it back. And we're going to do something else that helps with that as well. All we're looking for here is to be really subtle and for a bit of sparkle. So far we haven't really changed our levels much at all. If anything, we may have technically made it slightly quieter. Doesn't matter. volume control for our speakers should be relatively high at this point, up where you'd have it when you were mixing, because you're simply sculpting groove and tone at this point. That's all we're doing. If you'll see my maximizer here doing nothing. If I get to this point and I see that kind of stuff happening, I know that there is something wrong. My main mix is probably running too loud, or I'm running too loud here. So if that were the case, I'd actually back it off here until I had nothing happening here, and still 4 to 6 dB untouched in my meters up here. So that way I know, it's digital, I've got no signal to noise ratio problems. That way I know I'm not hearing a limiter, I'm hearing the track. And that way if there are any problems, I'm going to hear the real problems before I create them or make them worse later. So, little bit of soft compression to glue the track together and to bring out feel. Little bit of brightening on the top end. Watch for a tendency to turn this frequency right down. It can be very easy to do that. I'll show that over here because it's a bit easier to see. If we were to go to this, and if this were our EQ thing, let's look for our 8K. A little harder to make it accurate here. There you go. That's what this is doing here. That's what my M class is doing here. It's very easy to do this, because you go, oh, everything gets. Yeah, sure. You kind of turn the whole mix up and you've pulled in all kinds of mids and what have you, but it's going to sound very brittle, like really brittle and harsh. Initially, you're probably going to like it, because you may even start to bring in some kinds of distortions and things like that. But please be very, very cautious of doing that. That you want to have this happening right up past the air. Air is somewhere from around 4. 3 is very papery. And yes, you can be bringing in your 2s and 3s here and bringing a lot more out, but at what cost? This EQ here is anywhere sort of from 8 to 12. Much past 12, you're probably not going to gain a lot, especially seeing most people's speaker systems aren't necessarily producing it, and their hearing could well be unable to hear anything above 8 to 10 anyway. So somewhere around at the lowest 6 to 8 or 10, create a subtle boost. That's all you're looking for. Avoid the tendency to go, oh, but I can make it better if I turn it down more. No, more is not more at this point. More is just a mess. So, next thing. I like this device. Find your own favorite saturation thing. There are a ton out there, and most of them do more than one thing, and I do not like that. This has flaw, but it's not a problem. What a lot of them do is that they combine their saturation inside a device that's a compressor or a tape emulator, which is a compressor, and it's also got hardwired EQ curves. So what you get is you turn on your saturation device, whatever it's called, whatever fancy GUI logic they've given it, and it'll be doing something like that as well. Is that what you asked for? When somebody came to you, did they say, look, I want you to rip a couple of dB out of the guts of my piece? Is that a formula you saw on some 2-minute tutorial? Oh yeah, you make all your pieces good by ripping the guts out of them. I've seen this lots of times. Occasionally, by directly saying that, you're getting my work, buddy, or by advising some plugin that's a sound goodizer plugin. In other words, you put this in, amazingly, everything's going to sound analog and vintage, and you're going to be like a mofo, and no, no, no. You can apply those things to a track, not a mix. Occasionally to a mixed bus, but you can apply them to a track. So if you've got your bass sound, and it's not kind of doing it for you, you can apply one of those, here, let me fuck that up for you kind of plugins. No problems. That's just like plugging it into into an amplifier that's going to distort, and a loudspeaker that's going to distort even more, and putting a microphone up against it that's going to, well, distort again. That's doing the same thing. But be cautious about letting somebody else make the one-size-fits-all decisions for you, which most of those plugins do. You put them on, you go, oh, wow, I've done it. I've done it lots of times. I did it the other month. It was like, oh, maybe if I use that, it'll be... Take my mixers out into the lounge room, and I go, you know what, that sounds like shit. Because that's just not what it was supposed to sound like. So, the saturation knob from Softube is free, I believe, still in Reason, and I think you've got to give them your email to get it if it's a VST. Find your own, don't care what you use, but this one's a nice fella, and I've gotten real used to him. So what's he going to do? Back. Distortion. We do not want that. But in between, you may have noticed that everything just got... That's nice. It's tempting to go up higher. But you're going to get a lot of brittle. You don't want brittle. Remember, this needs to be warm and engaging. So I know that with this device, 0.7 works beautifully for me and the way I mix. Interestingly enough, it's worked nicely here as well. There is a situation recently where in a mix I did 1.5 on a vocal. It works beautifully, it doesn't distort. So there is no one size fits all, but keep it low. If you're not sure, keep it low. If it starts to do this, furry, keep it low. There are options on this fellow which allow you to just be saturating the lows or just be saturating the highs. Up to you, experiment with them. I far rather keep things very natural, as I said, like with compression, master busing, and what have you. In that the idea is to make this feel natural, not to rip it apart and go micro on its ass, but to keep it natural. It's become, at this point, it's become one thing. If you're talking to your girlfriend and she was made up of a bit here and a bit there, like Frankenstein together, you'd probably be less eager to live with her. So one tends to be better than many. Now, where we've got to, levels are about the same. The one flaw in this device is that as you turn this knob up, it adds level overall, and it never takes it away. Can be a bit of a pain, but I know that, and I'm not pushing it hard, or if I am pushing it hard, it's in the mix. And I know that, oh yes, I've just upped that instrument, so I better pull it back down after the fact. There's a million devices to do that. If you don't want to play with your channel fader, then you can use a gain, which we will show you shortly anyway. So that's set a tone that I like. We've got lots of nice detail. Where there's something quite dynamic, then our compressor just pulls back and gives a little bit of space, so the beginnings of that comes through, but then it actually pulls back and goes, it allows us to feel like, ooh, that was more exciting, and after that. So it actually makes that dynamic part seem louder, and afterwards it pulls the volume back a little bit so that we feel like we've actually expanded our dynamic range. We haven't. We've actually kind of shrunk it in some ways, but we've expanded our dynamic range in the way that we as humans hear it and feel it, and that's cool. It makes the piece feel bigger. So tiny moves in each one. We've got nice, bright. Notice how it's come forward. It feels more like it's reaching out, wrapping its little self around you. Your ears, your feeling, your heart. If the music you're working on is not reaching out to somebody's heart, then forget it. They're not going to love it. They might go, oh yeah, blaming mix, man. Forgotten. They're looking for something that's going to reach their heart. Interesting aside, I've just discovered a Turkish band whose name I'm not even going to try and pronounce because I'm going to mutilate it. They're a goth band. They started as a duo with just a guitarist, a bass player, and a drum machine. I'm very curious of them. Initially, I thought, wow, cool sound. I like this. And very Robert Smith guitar. But I was a little worried about how am I going to go with the fact that I can't understand any of these songs. They're all in Turkish. And I thought, is this going to become a problem for me? So I gave it a couple of days. I was listening to them, more and more of their tracks over YouTube. And you know what? The more I listened, the more I liked it. Even though it's in Turkish. I have no idea what any of their songs are about. But it works. It still grabs my heart far more than many other things that are in English. Why? Because whatever it is they do with their music is great. That's all it is. They have got some of my dollars buying one of their albums, actually one of their earlier albums. The new one I'm a little unsold on at the moment. But they've got that. They've got my money and the fact that I'm talking about them because they grabbed my heart. They didn't say, let's make perfect mixes, let's do this, that, and the other, a whole lot of formula shit. They gave me their songs, sometimes a bit raw, but that's brilliant because it grabs my heart. So when you're mixing, when you're mastering, that's your job. What we've done here right now is we've increased our sense of groove and dynamic range. We've given it some on top to make it exciting, some fizzle, like some bubbles on top, and we've added some extra harmonics, some fizz and sizzle in the middle of it so that it comes forward and spreads out. So it increases the chances of, if this is good material, if it's shit material, you're buggered. You shouldn't be wasting your time on it. That's polishing a turd. If it's good material, at that point, I'm going to want to get into it. Now, next thing is we want to get our levels to a point at which we are going to master them. As in, now we've got to work out how loud we can make this. We've got nice tone, we just need to get nice levels. It's well worth investing in a device like this. Something that's just a big level knob. It can have other features, as this has. It's got separate pan controls. It also allows me to adjust pan laws, which is cool. Occasionally use it for stuff, but it gives me levels. It's not intricate. I've had other devices that give you like millions and millions of pieces of visual information. What, is this a painting? Am I mastering Van Gogh's painting? No, I'm mastering a piece of music. And guess what music's about? Ears is. Use your ears, don't use meters. Meters have advantages, and you'll see me using them in a mo as I go through some problem mastering. But meters are good, but minimize their use. So what this is telling me is in the loud bits, I've got 3 dB that's unused. So I've got 3 dB up here, which we're not getting into. Brilliant. So I can go here, and I can go 3 dB. Now you can see this is starting to flash. Everybody meters a little bit differently. I should imagine this meters very aggressively, this meters in a reasonably smoothed way. Doesn't matter, learn your gear. Use the same things over and over, learn your gear. This isn't my favourite final mastering thing, so it's going to leave the mix right now. And I am going to grab my... I always forget who makes this one. It's always there in my mix. Not that. Not that. That. Sorry. It's always there, so I just don't need to go looking for it. What was that? Oh, I didn't like that at all. I know it's not any of these people. Why am I not finding it? Let's go do it this way. Oh. Not making itself easy to find. There we go. Onyx, chip limiter. Odd it didn't come up with limiter. There we go. So, this is always in my default project and it's always turned off. So it's sitting there, it's just doing nothing. But now, it's going to come in. This has got 3 options for its modes. Sadly, the manufacturer doesn't really tell you a lot about these modes or how they work. I always wish manufacturers did, so they didn't mystify you. It claims a tape mode, a digital mode, and a tube mode, and a bias so that you can change what harmonics are being made in the inbuilt saturation. This is not a clean device. Not a clean device at all. You'll also note that I don't ever touch its gain or threshold knobs. I handle all my gains from here. That means that if I choose to use a different limiter, sometimes I just don't like the results I'm getting from a particular limiter. If I choose to use a different limiter, my levels do not change. Because I trust this because I always use it. So, first thing we're going to want to do is set our output margins, as in this is the maximum volume at which this track is allowed to be. Tempting to say I want it to be 0 dB because I want this to be as loud as possible. It needs to be loud as fuck and louder again. No, because what's going to happen is when you send this to YouTube, it's going to go splat, 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 splat. And you're going to go, what's wrong with all YouTube? You suck. Now, YouTube may suck in this matter, but they ain't going to change for me or you. A lot of converters, whether that's converting to a streaming format or converting from digital audio to analog, do not like a 0 dB bit. In other words, they don't like being sent 100% of everything at once. They can have a cow. And that's not because they're cheap. Often the cheaper ones, not the cheapest, but often the cheaper digital analog converters don't have this problem. Some of the really expensive ones, audiophile stuff, mental priced, can have this problem. Just doesn't cope. You are not going to make friends with somebody who spent 10 grand on a spare pair of loudspeakers when you make them go splat. You might go, it's not my fault, it's because they're shit. But you guess who they're going to blame? Your track, because yours is the one that went splat, because Dire Straits didn't go splat. So, get ahead of it. I've heard some people say go as low as a whole dB down. I think that's a bit much. If someone can give me a real technical reason, great, go for it. 0.2 or 0.3 at dB is normally plenty. So that means that if we were to put this in another testing place, we should see that none of my peaks here actually hit the top of the can, that they stay 0.3 of a dB below the bottom of the can. There's air between my track and the lid. You want that. Now I've put a little bit of saturation in here. There's whatever saturation this device might have given. I don't know whether it does or doesn't, but compressors by their nature, if you make them work faster, they warp your signal. That's what they do. So we've got a little bit here. We've definitely got some here. We can hear it. And now we're going to add a little bit here. If we take this device just with our default settings, you can hear a little bit of a difference. I like having a little bit of saturation going into a little bit of saturation going into a little bit of saturation. It's quite a common thing for more advanced mix engineers to do. Rather than saying, oh yes, let's turn that to 78 and that solves all our problems, they will go, let's put a tiny bit here you can barely hear and a tiny bit here you can barely hear. This reflects the real world. Remember that bass that was a bit boring? We plug it into something which distorts. We put it through something else which distorts again. We put it through a third thing that adds more distortion. Little layers add up to exciting. Non-linear all over the place, and you'll show how I use that as a feature later. Now I'm not showing any limiting here, and it's shown as just hit 0 there. Now I'm going to look at my levels here. The peak's at 0 and my RMS is actually exceeding 12. Now this is the mental bit of the piece, the bit that's, I'm hitting you with all 4 of my swords at once. So it's not terrible for this to actually be intense, because that's what the music's trying to do. Down here, that's right, it's still pretty intense. So, entirely up to you. If I'm looking at across a whole album, if there's a whole album of that, I might sort of say, let's pull that back a little bit. If I'm worried about my LUFS volume for when it's going to go into a streaming situation, then if there's too much of that, I might sort of say, yeah, let's pull that back a little bit. But entirely up to you. But at the moment, with an incredibly easy compression and a very easy master, we're perfectly good. We can call that. We can say, master, print it, send it to the client. Hope he doesn't abuse you. We can look at a couple of other ways of handling our compression now. Feel how that feels bright and airy and open. If we pull this right down, that feels choppy. Short attack, short release, just feels choppy, especially with the choppy material. We don't want to do that. So if you've got a short attack, you generally want a longer release. We're doing a lot more compressing. It'd give us more level, we could output louder. But it's loud enough already. What we've done is just reduce our dynamic range. Yes, it'll let us put another 3 dB or 2 dB or something at our masters, but it's going to sound like shit. We can back that off a little bit. But I still think in the very slow is giving us a very nice, very transparent, and we know that we've got good levels. So, as I said, I would print that, send it off to the client. It fills every rule, so to speak. It's bright, it's engaging, it's nice and broad, it feels deep, it's dynamic, and it's fit for purpose in the box it's going to. Done. That's mastering. Again, please don't think that this is as easy as getting some plugins and duplicating my settings, because as you'll see, we have to do different things. Same thinking, but different things in some other tracks, especially where we've got some problems. If you apply presets of any kind, you're more likely to do things like going, okay, yeah, great, exporting that, and it's not as good as it could have been. That's not what you're trying to achieve. If you're at that point that you haven't fully understood this yet, get someone else to do it. Because this isn't about your ego in, I did everything myself because I'm the king of the universe. If you want to boost your ego, you want to put out something that people go, wow, man, that's awesome. Chicago. Imagine how their egos were feeling if they were watching when I was talking about how great their music is. That's what you're after. So sacrifice a little bit of ego, get someone else, or take the time. Now, time, really important. I did not know how to finalize tracks as well as this until really only a few years ago. Any of you who follow me know that I've been doing this for over 30 years, and I was trained in a commercial studio. It's taken me a long time to do. So, therefore, it has to be dubious. The best mastering engineers are normally old guys. Miserable, crotchety old bastards. Because they have decades of experience, decades of grokking. Not just saying, oh yeah, I understand, I could draw the picture, but of really understanding, like a Buddhist monk, understanding how this stuff works. When they look at this, they know it inside their core. Like I say, like a Buddhist monk knows Buddha shit. They know these devices and how they're going to impact on sound, on your sound, and when the sound is different, how they're going to impact on that. They know that deep inside themselves from having done it so long. Their pattern bank is like enormous. So please don't think you can just grab a couple of plugins, sound goodizers, turn them on, and you'll get the same result as somebody with years of experience who's gotten to that point where they really feel it inside. If you're looking to get great response, sacrifice a little bit of short-term ego for a long-term ego boost. Which is, like I said, if the guys from Chicago were listening to my comments on particularly their first best of, they'd be like, you know, we touched this guy. What's greater than that? Let's kill this one. Not saving. Now, you don't have to watch these ones, because it's long. It's always long with me. But this may be of interest to you, because we look at some problems. Here's another track. Okay, same basic stuff. But you'll see a few little differences. This is all essentially the same. We've got a little bit of a boost happening here, but I've introduced the old TDR Nova. Why is that? This, boys and girls, is why. It's here. Ooh, what happens if we bypass this? It's just too much. Just too much. There's an error in the mix. It's just too much splash. So then got to think, well, how do we work that out? And this is where years of experience come in, and the advantage of this new kind of doohickey, which is called a dynamic equalizer. So rather than reaching for a multi-band compressor to go, oh no, I've got a problem there, I can achieve the same sort of results. Like I can create a band. I can say, let's give it a threshold. The EQ curve stays flat, but look what happens when stuff happens. Ooh! Obviously that's a really nasty thing to do, but it shows you how they work. They EQ when you've passed the given thresholds. So in other words, if that frequency that I attacked there was quiet, nothing would happen. We'd still hear it the way it was meant to be. But if it got a little carried away, the guy just sort of dug in a little too hard, then it's going to go, okay, let's just turn those down at that point. So it's like a far more natural version of multiband compression. You're compressing using an equalizer over particular chosen bands. So where we've got this big splash, this looks brutal, but this really has a very small range. So what we've got is I set our threshold as high as I could so that most of the time it's doing nothing. Because we've got those rides and other cymbally metalwork going on, which are nice. I don't want to mess with them. I like them there, and I like them to be really, bright and cheery. But that splash, that will turn itself down at that point. I've gone from 3K because I think it's just white noise. I like it, but I don't like the way it ended up being mixed. So it's just a problem that appeared in this mix, and that's a way to solve it. The next problem was that the guy had sent this over had used his masters, like the final knob, to arrange his fade out. Now if my desk were up, my mixing desk here were up, you see that my automation is here, not here. Big difference. If I automate here and I change something in the mastering, then I've messed up this. You can do it that way, but when he's exported, naturally his fade was not there. So he talked about fading from, where does it start? I think from here. But this is actually a cool piece. I enjoyed the piece. It's one of those pieces, if you're getting into it, you don't want to have it turned off at 1 minute. It's complex enough that we can play it again, and it's quite cool. But when we get to the point where it's obvious, like, oh, we're going around again, really long fade. Tempting to just go, oh yeah, I'll just over a couple of bars. Hack it off. We're done. Leave the building. But you know what? I'm not done. I'm listening to this and I don't feel done. I can tell the person who's listening, yep, we got to fade out. So we drop the first few dB reasonably fast. You might think, oh well, it's no longer loud, who gives a shit, it's done, let's fuck off. And give it a really fast hack at this point. And there are records where they do that. But I don't feel good about that. It's situational. I was enjoying that. I was thinking that was going very, very nicely. I didn't want it chopped off. It would have felt truncated. Oh, what did I miss? What was so crappy after that? Did he play bum notes? It's like, no, let's just let this naturally keep going. It's a style decision, but it's one that that I think was right in the situation, and the client was pleased as well. So we've solved two problems before we got to this. Now the other problem is this mix is brittle. Yeah, how brittle that is, as in there is bass down there, but it's very brittle in the way the mix was done. But I don't want to change anything too much. This is the way he's seen it. I want to bring in a little bit of body in the 300. And I experimented between using the Nova or using the M class, and I vastly preferred the way it sounded with the M class. That made it the right decision. If I copied all the exact same numbers and put them in Nova, it just didn't sound as good. I don't love Nova as an EQ, to be honest. I love its dynamic compression, but I don't love it as an EQ. And a little bit. Now it would be very tempting to say, but yeah, I don't think that's a great plan. Go easy. He's mixed this way for some reason. And we still want that clarity. It is a chiptune record to some extent. So be it. That's the way it is. But that just shows it's better to make subtle moves than it is to go, oh, well, that's fucked up, and my vision is it should be this. Okay, if you're doing a creative mix, yes. If I had all the stems on this, I would have gone and mixed it at that point to say, let's get better definition down there. No, so subtly added just a little bit of to it, so just adds that little bit of presence and makes that good to go. Last one. Now this is an interesting one, very interesting one. It came across in gorgeous mono. Nothing wrong with mono. But it can, in a modern world where it can sound a bit forced and in your face. This was done, I don't know what system it was done, but there's a real chiptune, as in it was written on a chip. So it could be a Nintendo or a Sega or something or other. It's actually written on a chip, as you can tell. It's that really coarse, chunky, explodey sound that you get from the classic SID chip. There's nothing that does it like that. And I don't think, while there are emulators out there, I've heard one that sounds as brilliantly disastrous as your SID's and ZX chips. So this has a charm that you're not going to get anywhere else. But we have to live with the charm, but also bring it into the context of this record. If it was a whole record that's nothing but SID chips or Z80 chips, we might say, look, we won't do anything to it. But at the same time, people are going to want to listen to this and enjoy it. So we need to bring out what's great about it, but also massage what's not so great about it. If I were to follow the formula that we had before, which was to turn up the high shelf, let's just do that. We'll turn these off for the moment. We'll come back to them. Initially, your brain goes, oh yes, it's brighter, therefore it's nicer. But you know what? It starts to get very... After a while, that's not so nice. But it's still nice to give it presence. So we looked at, sorry, now I can't remember what was on. I think it was this. What I've done is I've gone very high, so up to 12, okay, and I've actually rolled it off a little bit, just because the really high stuff there, it's not pleasing to the ear. It's wasps in a jam jar scraping their nails down chalkboard kind of stuff. It doesn't need to be there. It's bright enough as it is. We're adding a little bit of extra bright. SID chips are saturated as all buggery. It's impossible to get a clean sound out of them. But nonetheless, you still get more presence adding that in. So basically what I've done is I've found, well, okay, where can I boost or cut the right frequency? Yeah, that's there. I've taken away some of the thick mids, because SIDs and Z80s chips tend to sound very thick, like really thick. And that's cool, but it can be a bit hard to listen to and get clarity. So we've rolled off just a tiny bit here. That helps give some clarity to the bass. I'm not going to boost that bass. Tempting to go, oh, we'll boost the bass for more. But no, none of these have been mixed with particularly clear basses. Anything I try to do to change that, to say, oh, well, I don't like how clear those basses are, and they're serving their roles just fine, but if I made a personal decision, which I shouldn't, and went, oh, well, I have to add... No. It's actually messing up the overall tone of the mix. I might say I like the bass better because it's bassier, but really if I want to do that, I should just go listen to, make my own piece of music with bass in it and turn the bass up. That would be arrogant. It would be ego. And you've got to watch the same in your own. You might go, oh, but it's my piece of music and I want to sound that way. Is that the way the real audiences really want to hear it? No, they want to hear what makes the music. Music, bass you can get anywhere. Absolutely anywhere. If they want to hear it bassier, they've probably already got a system where the bass is turned up. Their sub is probably far too loud, in which case they've already done that job for you. Give them a balanced mix. So that little roll-off just pulls back. Compressor's not doing a lot because everything's so naturally clipped within its sound source. But what I did do is this. It's quite mono. You'll see I've grabbed a pair of saturation knobs, and it was a funny choice. I initially thought, oh, what if I used a frequency shifter? Not a pitch shifter, but a frequency shifter. But it has so many phase issues that it ended up, I might as well just done the Hass effect of, 70 milliseconds onto the right channel, and it goes and explodes and sounds really artificial and yuck. Not that cruel. But I thought, well, Okay, saturation knob, it's designed to do slightly random things. Rather than applying, and it may have worked if I'd run it in stereo, but rather than applying it in stereo, I've said, okay, let's put one onto one channel and another onto another channel. Chances are it's got some kind of seed randomness going on in there. That's what I'm banking on. I don't want to make this sound big in stereo. That would be the dumbest thing we could do. The most obvious thing we could do, but the dumbest thing we could do, because we're turning this into something that it's not. Game chips, SIDs, Z80s, what have you, are mono, out of a mono speaker. You know, a tabletop or a plastic tub. They're not hi-fi. But at the same time, that really rigid, stuck in the middle of your head like it's drilling into your third eye, a little uncomfortable on the modern ear. This, I think, has added just a tiny bit of separation. Doesn't matter whether it has or hasn't, that extra little bit of saturation has brightened the whole mix. So we've got a little bit of saturation here, a little bit of saturation here, a little bit of saturation here. And even though SIDs are, well, distorted like absolute bastards from the word go, adding that little bit of extra saturation has given the brightness and the clarity that it's very hard to get out of a mix that's come out of a SID, because but it's a beautiful sound. It is chiptune and you gotta love it. So that's how I solved a couple of problems. Tried to give it a very, very tiny stereo, so from here to perhaps here, rather than going, ooh, let's get clever. Don't do that. Just from here to perhaps here. It's enough to stop it from feeling like it's being poked in the third eye, as I said. To EQ a little differently based upon what this needs, which in this case was just pulling out mids is not that much of a big deal, but I pulled out the mids more to allow the bass to have a little bit of clarity, standard enough kind of thing, but I've actually rolled off my highs because they're not adding anything pleasant to this mix. We've got enough saturation from the SID and from my saturation devices doing their little bits, that we've ended up with a cool sound. It's brutal, but that's the charm of SID. So that really covers everything. There are a whole lot of tracks. It was like 20 minutes worth of short pieces, but these were the ones where I had to do some interesting things on a few of them, but these were ones which were pretty good examples. So first one I've shown you, that's pretty standard. Second one, we've shown you how to fix a problem with something being in the mix that was hard to deal with, and I've shown you dynamic EQ and how dynamic EQ solves the problem that you try to use multiband compressors for without giving you the problems of multiband compressors, phase crosses, and like I say, just hacking the music into slices, which is, do it if you want, but to me it's not a nice thing to do to music that you're trying to be kind to, trying to flatter. And this one, mono to stereo without doing something horrible like Hass or chorusing it or any of those other things that's just going to make it sound so artificial. And also doing the wrong thing by actually rolling off some of our highs where they're not serving the purpose, even though we could add to them and go, oh, but that sounds even brighter. It's not bright for brightness' sake. It's bright for engagement, and when it stops being engaging and more like an ice pick, then we say, get thee behind me, Satan, and all of that. If you have questions, feel free to ask me questions, intelligent questions about things that I've said I don't like doing that. Don't just tell me I'm wrong, because otherwise I'll nuke you, which is fair enough because you're in my space. But ask me a question. Hey, What do you think about that? And I'll engage with you. Anything else? Or, of course, if you've got some material that you'd like to have mastered, or if you'd like to have something mixed for this channel, my details are down below. Please be in contact. Let's have a conversation. You have a great day now.